Hola Miguel,
Hola, ¿qué tal?
bien.
Bueno,
Ah, mira, hoy funcionan los... Intento poner, no sé si tú lo ves,
eh,
los subtítulos, pero son horribles.
vale. Espera, que me está llamando alguien. Voy a atenderlo antes de que... eh,
Venga.
nada, lo pongo en silencio y ya está.
Vale, pues nada, cierro como siempre y esperamos a ver quién se conecta.
De acuerdo,
Venga, Miguel, hasta ahora.
hasta ahora.
Hola Miguel, empieza a admitir, ¿vale?
De acuerdo.
De momento solo está Betiana, admito, ¿eh?
Vale.
Good morning, Betiana.
Hello, how are you?
Fine. How are you? Nice
Good,
to see
good.
you again.
Hello, good morning or good
Hi.
afternoon.
Hi, Joao.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Bien.
Hola, Joao.
Sorry, in English, right? Hola,
Yes.
Miguel.
So it's your first meeting with us, Joao?
Yeah, I was not able to join, but I will check the other ones.
Okay, good. So you will see we've been evolving. So from the way we started, but anyway, that's how it should happen. As we learn more and more about what we're dealing with from the knowledge and qualified opinion of so many experts.
Wait, sorry, that's quite a diverse group I saw.
Hi, Are.
Hello,
Hello, Oren.
Hi.
sorry to be late.
No problem.
No problem. We always give
No.
some extra time for allowing everybody to get connected. I don't know an hour. I don't recall whether that person, Javier Suarez Pandiello, has confirmed
No, Javier, he has told us that he wasn't able
to attend
to
to the meeting.
participate.
Yeah, okay. That's good to know. Because if I'm right, we have, I think Silke also said time ago that she wouldn't be able to be with us today. So if Silke and Javier won't be today with us, I think all the group members available are here.
Did you by chance send the questions? I'm sorry if I missed it.
Sorry?
Did you send the questions for today? Anna, maybe I missed it.
Yes, we send them, but I'm going to introduce them if you into the chat, and I'm going
Okay, awesome. Thank
to
you.
link the mirror in the chat.
Joe, in the meantime, could you just make a very short introduction of yourself so that we can know a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, sure. I'm from Portugal. I'm a PhD candidate, so I've been researching entrepreneurship and innovation in rural areas in Portugal for the last 5 years. So I'm in the final months of my PhD, actually. And also I'm a co-founder and coordinator of an NGO called Rural Move. Basically, we are kind of similar to what Cives Mundi does in Spain. So we create some dynamics in rural areas, and we have our Rural Leaders Academy and so on. So basically, we work a lot in Portuguese rural areas, doing capacity building, doing also some research, and helping people that want to move to rural areas.
Thank you, Joao. I think we could proceed with our meeting. Oh, yes, the questions. Well, I don't know if you want to go through them before we get into the discussion, because that it's intended to be rather a discussion. We through this participating process are trying to little by little try to come to a proposal for a methodology for assessing the quality of rural proofing, first in general terms, and with an eye on the 6 actions that, according to the European Rural, the European Network for Rural Development, defined in a document that is a little bit the template we're following at this first phase. 6 actions around which we are discussing in groups. So today is the day for this 5th action, dealing with monitoring and evaluation. And the next phase will be around studying cases in different countries that are applying rural proofing, actually, or did rural proofing in the past, but that can give us a valuable information about this. And we will focus on that phase, particularly on what touches monitoring and evaluation. And this will be let's say the end of our online meetings. So we'll try to get to know particularly the way monitoring and evaluation is carried on in these countries, and we will try to discuss around it. So this group is important in that perspective, and I would like to start, before we get directly into the question, with something that came up during our discussions in our last thematic group. It was about if I can find the proper words, it will be the best. Actually, is rural evaluating or rural proofing about monitoring the very process, or we should try to consider the vision formulated in Action 2, and in contrast with the quality of that very process. That means, because when we talk about monitoring, it seems that well, monitoring is about the question, answering to the question of are we doing what we said that we were going to do? But if we talk, so it focuses on the very process. And when we talk about evaluation, I think it's rather about the question of, well, what has happened as a result of our activities, and have we reached the target that we set for ourselves. And that links to action 2, of course, what vision we formulate for world-proofing. So it's about impact assessment. I don't know exactly if evaluation and impact assessment can be considered synonymous. Maybe in English it has a different translation. In Spanish, at least, everything tends to go to the concept of evaluation. But I must point out that I have the feeling that impact assessment is ex ante, and evaluation is ex post. So, in that messy state of my mind, I will try to look the light of your knowledge and understanding, and then go to the questions I suggested. As a suggestion, you can challenge these questions and you can change the whole set of our arguments for today. So please, does anyone want to make an opinion on what I just said to start with?
Maybe Betty is most experienced here.
What I will, here's what I will say, and I was taking notes as you wrote. I feel for me, the question is, I know you said vision. I didn't get to listen to the first 2 groups. I apologize. But for me, what you're monitoring has to be linked to the objective of the rule-proofing process. So I'm very sensitive about the word vision, because vision for rural is broad. And there might be a number of things that are taking place to help the vision come to life. And rule-proofing is one component of that. Whereas if rule-proofing and the process that you have designed, is it effective? Is the checklist or being used? Is the evidence available, being digested and being, and if the report back is we can't use this checklist or we can't do X or Y, then that rule-proofing process is not working. But if all the things that you have designed for rule-proofing is working, but the decision maker, for whatever reason, still decides to take a decision that works against rural, I'm probably in the minority, but I'm going to say rule-proofing didn't fail because it did what it was supposed to do. The decision maker went in a different direction. And that's why I say managing expectations about rule-proofing is very important, because that's why it gets such a negative, people respond to it so negatively because they put so much on it and it can't do everything by itself. It's one tool with other tools. That's just my response.
Very clear. And I think this debate will chase us throughout the whole process. Please.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Sorry. Go, Ari. Go, Ari.
Ari or
sorry,
John?
I'm also the non-English speaker, but this ex ante or ex post that in OECD studies and in European Union, we have ex ante impact assessment or regulatory impact assessment and ex post impact assessment. But in many fields, like in environmental studies and so on, the evaluation is more dominating. And also in the sense of ex post evaluation of the policy process. And I'm fully agree with this objective in strategies and in legal acts also. It is the basis for the impact assessment, but in Estonian practices on national level, when I'm assessing the draft acts from different ministries, then sometimes the objectives are also not very clear, not very smart. And then we are measuring different social, environmental, economic, also security and administrative impacts. and we are trying to put them on the map. And if there are some differences in urban and rural areas, then it is the case of regional impact assessment or territorial impact assessment and rural proofing in specifics, if it is related to the villages and small towns and these kind of regions. And no, our problem is that it is not very systematic, this analytical stage, but we have the regulated mandatory approach to evaluate different draft acts. Yeah. So in brief.
Thank you, Ari. Joao, please.
Okay, can you hear me? Because I'm not able to connect my camera. I don't know why.
Don't worry about your camera.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, I will try later. Yeah, I totally agree with Betty. I mean I think that a combined approach is that so I wrote in the post it a combined approach is ideal. So we can just evaluate something because it's possible to have these indicators, but also it should be aligned with the vision expectations and also, if possible, with the rural communities expectations. And yeah, I think I have a contribute because at least here in Portugal we are using a lot, especially in social innovation, but also in other areas, this theory of change approach. And I think that, I mean, it could be adapted to what to something that we can use in this monitoring and evaluation. So basically, the theory of change is how we measure the change and the impact of a given project. So usually we have assumptions, resources, and so on. But then we have this interesting approach of dividing it in outputs, outcome, and impact. So actually, for example, when I present a social innovation project to a government fund, and actually it's mandatory now for to use this approach in some calls, in some public funding calls. I have to define what are the outputs. So the outputs are usually a short-term goals and usually very quantitative. So number of things, but then also the change at long term or medium term. So what are the outcomes of our rural proofing strategy, and also the impact, so the long term outcomes. And I think it would be interesting to have this approach, since also we were talking about who would monitor and evaluate this. I think, for example, the outputs is something that the officials have to do periodically, but then the outcomes and the long-term outcomes, so the impact, would be external independent evaluators, because it's usually done like for 2 years or 5 years. So yeah, I mean, it's something that that I think it could be interesting to explore.
Hey, Anna, if you wouldn't mind, I'm unable to open the mirror board on my OECD computer, so I will depend on you to add anything that I might say to the mirror board. May I just add one thing? I think it's important as we're thinking about indicators. I see two different types of indicators of measurement. One is kind of how many people have been engaged in the rural proofing process. How are you increasing awareness and knowledge among government departments about rural? Because the whole process is meant to increase awareness and knowledge about rural, which we know outside of certain departments is low. So you can get, you're starting from a weak part, you're educating a wider tranche of your rural proofing public. And then also how many folks are participating, how complex is the process, and so you're kind of measuring those types of pieces. The impact analysis, or maybe the impact of rural proofing, that's where I get a bit skeptical in terms of what would those indicators look like. Because I would still go back to the objective. That to me is linked to what was the actual objective, not vision, but like when you say the objective of rural proofing is to do X, Y, Z, and M, then to me, you're checking the impact is, did you achieve X, Y, Z, and M? That's a fair measurement. I don't know if I'm clear, but that's how I see that we have to make sure we're linked to the objectives that you set. And one of the things we wrote about from the OECD, I'm actually doing a longer study on rural proofing in one country now, is one of the keys to consistent failures of rural proofing is that it's linked to vague objectives or too big and broad objectives. So it's hard to measure because the objectives and those pieces were vague. So it's that clarity and making sure that it's contextual, it's linked to the context that's important. I'll stop there.
Do you think then that rural proofing quality is rather an obligation of behavior, but not an obligation of policy result? If we understand as policy result what happens on the ground, what if the quality of life improves or the income of rural people and so on.
Again, from the OECD perspective, it's very hard to see rural proofing. You can certainly say if you rural proof, rural will get better, but that's not a fair thing to put just on rural proofing. It's rural proofing plus other aspects. But when we see in countries where you put that as your vision, then everyone says rural proofing fails. And then everyone hates rural proofing because they say we tried it and it didn't work. And then when we as the OECD evaluated, we find that they put rural proofing by itself to fix all rural problems. And that is, rural proofing cannot do that. It's a tool. So the policymaker, so you have to design it and then you have to test it to make sure it's working. The key indicators to us are how many people used the process that you set up. So you have a baseline, no one's rural proofing. How many people have used it? Is the process clear? What is the level of complexity? Do you have the evidence? Do you have the right type of evidence that is needed? Is the evidence clear? How many stakeholders were engaged? Did you have a diversity of stakeholders that are represented? Those are fairer indicators. Now, is rural proofing contributing to improvement and quality of life improvement in rural areas. That's a fairer way to me of framing it than saying rural proofing will change rural, is it contributing? And then you can look at all those indicators and you can say, well, not enough people are using it. It's too complex, X, Y, Z, and M. So it's not contributing. It's not bringing in diverse. That's one way. I mean, again, there are other ways, but we have to be also fair. If you're going to stand up a new rural proofing initiative, you don't want to set it up to fail. That's very important. So we understand that we want to put everything in there, but we also don't want to put in place something that will just fail. Like, we don't want that either. I don't know if that's clear, but yeah.
I would like to add on an American sociologist, Selznick, emphasized that the knowledge-based policy is related to the responsible policy making, and rural proofing as a tool to be responsible in rural policy making. And this connection, and also then the role of monitoring and evaluation to give feedback how it's going. This kind of explanations would be also clear for different target groups, and this human-centric aspect also, that knowledge-based and responsible policy design, engagement, negotiations, and so on. And yeah, how to find maybe simple indicators, and this indicators is very good. That how many organizations or persons were engaged during this process. It is also quite good indicator and it is quite simple to measure also, because we have this data. And maybe how to find simple indicators, it maybe would be our topic for future discussions. Maybe in different countries we have some different aspects and priorities and so on, but one of the basics would be how many organizations or how many persons were engaged during the process of policy design.
Thank you. João, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is it really depends exactly on the goals, and if we leave this to the political institutions, we will depend on the will of will they have to measure and to define the indicators, and then to measure its success or not, because I mean, I will give you an example. Here in Portugal, we have a program to called a Programa de Valorización. So, I don't know what's in English, but valuing program of rural areas, basically. And yeah, so it was actually well done in terms of strategy and vision, but then it didn't define any specific policy or any specific indicator. So it was a very general strategic plan, and it was launched. It was revised by the next government, and then they are they hire a consulting firm to do impact assessment of this program, and they invite me to a focus group. And the thing the consulting firm said in the focus group was, "Oh, we are not doing like indicator assessment because there were no indicators defined in the strategic plan." And I'm like, okay, maybe we don't have an indicator specifically, but we have the intention, for example, to they had, for example, a Campus Rural initiative similar to Spain. So mobility of youth and of researchers to rural areas. But they didn't define any indicator. They didn't define how it will be executed. And I told the consulting firm, I mean, you can read between the lines, and you can say, was this initiative implemented or not? How many students went to the countryside? And I mean, it is really dependent on the intention of the public institution that is designing the program. Um, so that's why I think that this logic of outputs and outcomes and give leaving these outcomes and long-term impact more to someone independent or that can do it, like 5 years from now we will do this evaluation no matter what. I don't know. I don't know, but it is challenging because I mean, it is really dependent on the institutions.
But I think I agree with you. I definitely think that, I mean, normally what we have observed in the rule proofing process is that there is always a convening or a lead entity that has to help with rule proofing. It doesn't just happen on its own, right? So national, regional, local, that looks different, but let's stay with national for a minute because that's clear. So when we studied rule proofing at the OECD, we found one consistent thing, whether you're within Europe or outside of Europe. Someone has to take responsibility for rule proofing. They're either inside government or outside government. Both had problems. So let's just be clear first. Outside government, the UK has a great example of that. Commission for Rural Communities, Jane Adderton can tell you more. But when I did the rural review of the UK, the biggest problem with this Commission for Rural Communities, and they were political body, all the things that probably you talked about when you talked about, political support, et cetera, ear of the Prime Minister, rural proofing, abject failure. Why? Because they were an external body that lacked the authority to have ministries of education, finance, etc., listen to them. Put simply, why would we listen to an external institution? Then you go to the other ways it's done, which is inside the government, someone, whether it's a parliamentary committee or rural policy council as in Finland, or departments of agriculture or wherever rural sits, let's call it that. They are then endowed with the authority to oversee rural proofing, which means they would be the likely persons to do the monitoring and assessment, because they're also the ones responsible for developing the checklists or whatever. However you frame it, you always need a lead entity. Just put that in the right. They also had challenges because when you're outside of the political entity, if you're Departments of Agriculture or Rural, you still don't have the authority as the Department of Agriculture to have the Department of Education listen to you. You cannot. Department of Finance, Department of etc. So then you still need someone from the top to say, here you are, here is your, The reason why Finland stands out to all countries in this space is because they've pushed it up a little bit higher in that space. The Rural Policy Council sits at the parliamentary level, right? So they're able to centralize and embed it down, all the way, by the way, down to the local level. Now they have their own problems, but there's that. So I think as we are thinking about this, who will monitor, it's linked to who is the lead body. That's basically what I'm saying. And that is the same whether you're doing regionally or locally. And then do they have the capacity or the authority to then, obviously do what needs to be done, but also kind of carry out the monitoring and evaluating process and etc. And that's, of course, linked to all the other conversations that you've had, but they're linked. We can't delink them. They are, they're connected.
Yeah, can I ask a question? When I was in the focus group of this evaluation program, the program evaluation, at some point, someone asked, no, the consulting firm asked, is it this program like rural development program only about European funding? Because most of the people just talked about the European funding metrics. So, we were able to implement what 3 million for this and 3 million for this and 90% of the funds from this. So they just talked about European funding. So how also we can move to this outcomes perspective, to this uh, impact on the regional development, on the quality of life, on everything. How can we move beyond these numbers, like very clear indicators like percentages and the number of funding attracted and so on? It's a challenge.
No, I mean, I think for me, that's why we come back to your objectives. So if you say, I'm going to stand up a rural proofing initiative, wherever, at whatever level, you're doing it for a reason. What is that reason, right? But then you have to say, if it's the reason is to make rural life better, that's too broad. Then you don't understand what rural proofing is. From our perspective, we would say that's too broad. Because who is rural proofing? Rural proofing is meant to educate rural proofing is not for departments of agriculture or departments of rural. It's for outside departments who don't think about rural, who are drafting policies that are affecting rural, to better understand what the impact is that they're doing. So the process is educating outside, you're developing something where you're getting people who don't think about rural to think more about rural. That's one indicator. That's why I say increased awareness, right? So every time you have a Department of Labor or finance person, even at the local level, think, oh, maybe we should do this and not that, there is your impact going up, right? Then it becomes engagement of non-rural department people and urban folks. You get what I mean? Like, it's a less, it's not so, and then you can start to see the impact, because now you are spreading through rural proofing, instead of it just being within agriculture or rural knowledge and awareness is going up. Then you have the rural, we call it rural proofing intelligence. The quality of the rural proofing intelligence matters. So rural proofing doesn't work if the rural proofing intelligence is weak. By this, I mean, what is the evidence for action that you're asking them to pay attention to? How is the data collected, collated? How is it translated and shared? Quantitative evidence, qualitative evidence, that's where you're bringing in all the stakeholders, all of these pieces. So we've had folks, because I interviewed a lot for our work, I interviewed a lot of folks who you would consider rural proofers. And my question was, how did you find the process? Why did you rural proof? Why didn't you rural proof? They said, too complicated. I did not understand the information. I didn't have the time. because I had to respond so that's one of the reasons why when we wrote it, we were very clear, remind you it's a process and that you have to, I'm an American, so whenever I talk about it, I say, think about a car and a supply chain. The car, you have to put on the doors, you have to make sure the windows you have to make sure the process is working, and you have to test the process, and you have to test the process with the person who's going to use it. And then when they start to embed it into their work, and then you say, oh, rural proofing is working because whatever you've given them, they're using your evidence, they're using your information, they're using the stakeholders that you made available to them. That to me is a nicer way of saying, okay, rural proofing is contributing to improved impact in rural places by increasing awareness and knowledge about rural among non-rural thinkers.
That's great. Probably that we need is to relocate the position of rural proofing. I mean, to redimension the whole thing, because rural proofing obviously will never be a replacement of what of our strategy for rural areas. It should be a part of it. One of the many tools at your disposal to try to cope with rural challenges and needs and opportunities, but not discharging all responsibility on rural proofing or on rural proofers' shoulders. So that I think that gives a better perspective of the potential about rural proofing, and also the difficulties to focus on.
But
Yeah, I really
go ahead.
no, sorry. I really like this rural proofing intelligence. I think it could be something to explore further. And I think how can we combine that with this the concept and knowledge of or principles of collective intelligence. So how can also the communities, and also I saw someone that put a mirror this open government strategy or open government partnership. How can we combine these open government principles, collective intelligence principles? How can we engage community in building this rule proofing intelligence? I think that's
And
something
you
also.
should. And that's
Yeah, you should.
actually,
But how? Yeah,
and so in our paper, that's what we spoke about. We said first you recognize that you need different types of rural proofing intelligence, right? And that is where you use what you already have, because rural proofing intelligence is just packaging, getting actors to be involved in packaging the data that's now existing in different parts of government in different ways, using your institutional actors as well as your people living locally. And a quick example of how we did it in the US was Department of Agriculture. We took information from all the other federal government ministries, because we got data that said rural was not using Department of Environment resources. They weren't using education resources. They were coming to the Department of Agriculture for everything. And the point was, you're not supposed to do that. Housing has resources, So when we did our collective intelligence, we went around and said, why aren't you using these resources at the very local level? But in, we don't know where it is. We don't understand it. We don't. So we then said, this is how we, as Department of Agriculture, can help all these other ministries. We took their data. We asked them for the right to just view their data. We didn't do anything to it. It actually still exists. I can send you the link. We created what we called a rural community toolbox, where we took the data from every federal agency, 17. We designed it in rural language and we made it public. We called it ruralcommunitytoolbox.org. And then we went around, we used our staff, which is why I said lead body, to go down at the very local level. And what did we do? We told them it was there. And then we collected the data and we saw, because I monitored it, that was my job. One user, Arizona, one user, then in a month, 15 users, 30 users. Then it started going up and everyone started to use it. And what did it tell them? How to get resources for healthcare, how to get housing access. All things that, by the way, are outside of agriculture. So it was basically exactly what we're saying. And we used, people started locally. We then exited because we did our part, which was just to build it. And it still exists, by the way. That's why we said rural proofing worked, because 2 agencies, when I left, took it over. And one of them, both of them don't think rural at all. The Ministry for Mental Health and the Department of Justice combined to keep it because they realized they were reaching more rural communities through that toolbox than they were before. So there are mechanisms to do just that. And that, I'm just using that as an example to say, that's how you can get the community engaged.
Well, that's great. I would like now, if there's nothing else to add to what we have learned today. At least I've learned a lot. Every day, at every thematic group meeting, I learn new things. With Betty Ann, that's something I take for granted, by the way. But anyway, I would like to focus a little bit on the Miro canvas. Let's say, you cannot have access to it yet, Betty?
No, for some reason it's blocked on my OECD computer. So, so I'm not. I haven't been able to get on it.
So same in my side.
Okay. What I will do is
the computer I can't access.
No, I will read what's been written on it, if you don't mind, just for you to have all the opinions and to make opinions as well on the others' opinions and answers. So, well, we have gone through a good deal of what we asked. For instance, is this in terms of responding to these expectations, or rather for the process when we talk about monitoring and evaluating. Castilla-La Mancha wrote, we must be able to generate an adaptation of the actual regulations to rural areas. Well, adaptations of the, oops, Joel, you are just on my view. Yeah, good. To rural areas. Adaptations of the conditions or different conditions for these areas must be included in evaluation and monitoring, both at the normative level and in strategic planning. Well, and Joao says...
Yeah, I wrote what I wrote. I basically said.
Okay.
Said here, yeah.
So your 2-3 stickers to it.
Yeah, but it's basically what I said. Yeah.
What you said. Good. So there was that other question on when would be the appropriate time to report on the performance of rural proofing. Once proof laws and policies have been adopted, taking into account the potential impacts detected, avoided or mitigated, that will be a process assessment. Maybe that's wrong after what we
no, may I ask a question? And
sure,
maybe it goes to your point, and maybe you can put it on the mirror board. Perhaps you should think about measurement in 2 tranches and not 1. maybe you should say, first you're measuring, when you introduce rule proofing, you're measuring how you're getting the process right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you spend time saying, are you increasing awareness? Are more people using it, etc.? And then once you've gotten to a point where you see those numbers are consistent, then you're measuring the impact it's having overall. But I think measuring impact on rural life when the process is new might be the part that's unfair. So I'm not saying you shouldn't measure impact. I'm saying maybe first, you measure first if you are putting in place a process that is good. And then after maybe, I don't know, a period of time, 2 to 3 years, you could say, okay, now we know the process is good. You should start to see this impact. Does that make sense? So like separate a bit by time some of that.
So timing is relevant?
I think timing is relevant. When the process is new, you can't expect it to immediately work. And that will allow you to, especially in the context of government, manage expectations better.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree. That's why I thought on this approach when Betty was talking about this theory of change approach, because you will not put as a short-term goal the improvement of the quality of life, for
Right.
example. It will, it's not it will not match the expectations probably. And if you have these two or three moments, I think it could manage the expectations better, because obviously probably you will, I don't know, reduce for example, reduce the aging dependency index. Probably
Mhm.
it's something that you should only evaluate 5 years from now,
Exactly.
not next year.
So,
Um,
so, so you're trying to still first identify the short-term goals, and then you have longer-term goals, and then those are the two you measure, right? You're going to take whatever the objective is, you're going to put it in a box. First, get rural proofing right. You're going to measure that. And then once you think you've gotten it right, because you have to set some standards, then you can say, what is the impact? And that's your longer term kind of measurement pieces.
Miguel, your microphone is closed.
Yes, sorry. Oh, I apologize. Yes, I was trying to start reading the note left by the representatives of the government of Castilla-La Mancha on this. They said it should have a two-pronged approach in the process of drafting the regulations, so that the legislator and planner have the reality of rural areas from the beginning of the process, and then have a system of evaluating the impact of these regulations on the territory. Well, it seems they put the focus on that vision that we were talking about, and probably we will have to reconsider this approach. And there's also a comment that is intended for all the questions in general made by Professor Javier Suárez Pandiello from the Universidad de Oviedo. And he says, in my opinion, monitoring and evaluation tasks are essential in any process that aims to implement significant reforms to improve people's quality of life, etc. Generally, I would distinguish between process monitoring and outcome evaluation. On the one hand, the design of objectives should be accompanied by monitoring measures to ensure the timely execution of procedures and the implementation of reforms. On the other hand, evaluation processes make more sense afterward, when the reforms have been implemented, as a way to assess their effectiveness and efficiency in relation to the intended objectives. In any case, both types of measures should be considered while aiming to minimize bureaucratic complexities, clearly assigning responsibilities, trusting the judgment of evaluators, and avoiding long supervisory chains. In this regard, I believe an independent evaluation, separate from the official one, makes perfect sense, led by and under the responsibility of academic experts, with input and participation from stakeholders. As precedents for such approaches, one could refer to and, why not, draw inspiration from open government partnership programs in which an increasing number of government institutions worldwide have been involved, like in the case of Spain, Asturias, and my homeland, Aragon. Well, interesting views, and I think that also that goes in the lines of what we have been saying, more or less, today. Do you want to add anything or to make any comment on this qualified opinion?
There are many ideas. In brief, maybe if we're trying to focus on ex-ante impact assessment, then my weekly activities related, for example, to the advice the policy departments, and I'm emphasizing that it's very important to distinguish different actors in business sector, for example. And for example, in food supply chain, there are more than 6 different business groups or entrepreneur groups. And if we are talking about in the context of change management, that is the situation now and the situation in the future, or the proposal, and what will be changed for them. And after that, what kind of management tools they need to manage their businesses and so on. And it is the benefits for businesses are the outcome, but the impact would be related to the structural changes in behavior, etc., etc. So that it is quite hard, and it depends on concrete draft act. And in this sense, we are separating the policy outcomes and these open governance tools, and how satisfied they are with the process, and how satisfied the stakeholders are with the outcomes in policies. And this satisfaction with engagement process, it is also an important indicator in any cases. And
I agree.
And in general, that every political initiative, including draft laws, would be also have this feedback study where the satisfaction with process and satisfaction in outcomes, and it depends. It is education, it is housing, or etc., and are separated and measured. And also, it is the basis for policy learning after this process. And maybe when we are proposing, it's going on political level, then it is possibility for corrections. But what I would like to emphasize as a old sociologist, that the distinction different stakeholders groups in details, their interests, also cost benefits in economic terms, which are related to the change management, is important to measure it. I try to translate myself into English, but hopefully some ideas.
Thank you, Aure. Of course, this is far more complex than even just limiting ourselves to the very process. It has enough complexities so as to be very careful when we decide that, well, monitoring or assessment is made thoroughly and accurately. But it's of course the most important thing is that feedback that entails adapting, readapting, reviewing, reconsidering the process partially or even completely. Well, I will go on with the Miro Blackboard, or
just a quick question on the monitoring side of things. Was there any thought about how to make sure that the monitoring and evaluation process doesn't add a new layer of bureaucracy, to another, government by nature is already very complicated and very complex. So I think we spoke a little bit earlier about who is going to monitor, but if the person is outside, is the evaluation going to be taken seriously and respected? But then there's some component of inside, because the rule proofing is being done by civil servants. I mean, whether we want to address it or not, there has to be some kind of way to look at indicators, ways to add indicators to already performance reviews or things like that, or ways to ensure that, or engagement between agencies. There are different ways to look at indicators to see if rule proofing is also working. I don't know if that's clear, but it's not just the external, it are more Department of Education folks now meeting with rural agencies, like the cross learning. How do you measure that? And we're doing some work right now on how do you measure integration in government, and we're indicators of higher levels of cross-body meetings and work-ins and all of those elements. Those also support rural proofing, is my point. Like, there already exist in ways that you can take advantage of to promote that work.
Yeah, so basically, I think what I think it's like how you can foster a rural proofing culture,
Exactly.
basically, in within the administration. So
That's
that's
the point.
yeah, I mean that's
But the reason why we frame it this way on purpose, because we at the OECD, we took a different position on political will. So, for example, what we found in countries is where rural proofing is too dependent on political will, it fails. Because, election cycles come and go. So you're always having to, you have political will, and once people love it, and then the person is out of office, now it's hated again, you have to reintroduce it. So the response to that is how to embed rule proofing into the civil servant mindset. The people who are not going away are your people who work in government. So we're not against political will, but you use political will to embed it. That's the point, to embed it so that when it goes away, people don't know, but they're still doing it. And that's a different angle.
I totally agree. I mean, from my experience at local or even regional or national level, I mean, of course, you have this high level political support and the political will, but officially, I mean, are the administration, the officials that execute and have this culture or thinking principles when are writing or measuring some
Right.
regulations. So yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. Yeah. So because you could have all the high level policy aligned with the rule of proofing, but if the administration is
The
not
execution, right. And not to go off topic, but that's one of the reasons why the formal or informal always comes up, because the idea is when you have political will, but then it's still not being done, then it becomes, what if they're forced to do it because it's now, part of the performance review or part of the, the civil servant is forced to rural proof because it's now a requirement by law or X, Y, Z, and M. And then that always has its own problems because countries don't always want to go that far, right? So that's why we took a position of saying that's why it's a pilot. You test it, you embed it in their mindset, and you measure integration. You measure how much they come back together. You measure how much they are using the words you use, and that's also linked to the quality of the evidence and the quality of the rural supporting instruments that that changes their knowledge. So it's all linked. Sorry, I'm making your life worse.
Not at all, but that's absolutely relevant. And for the case of Castilla-La Mancha, who is at the beginning of this initiative, it's very pertinent. They have just given that political momentum to the idea of building rural proofing for their own political goals, but also to stay. And one of the things is that we need to get rid of the idea that it depends on only this very government, but should be, let's say, getting part of the administration and political culture of all decision makings at the very different stages. So it will deserves a progressive, gradual approach for establishing and also to create that collective intelligence around decisions made that can have an impact on rural areas if they are not carefully considered.
Before Ira comes in, I think that's why I think the question for this project is important, because the question should be how to use the political will that you have now to embed the culture. Assume you should work as if you're going to lose political will in 4 years, right? So how then do you try to embed it now? Now, if you still have it later, that's great. But if it goes away, you were prepared.
Perfect. Ari?
I would like to ask just if I understood correctly, the government of Castilla-La Mancha is also interested to analyze the existing regulations and how equal they are in the perspective of rural areas. So in this sense, the ex post impact assessment of existing regulations, and if there is inequality in regulations, for example, in transport regulations or so, then they are ready to change it based on the ex post impact assessment. It is another approach. Usually it is ex ante, and we are trying to change the negotiation process. But now, based on the existing data and real analysis, it is maybe another big study also in this sense. It is also very important that this ex post impact assessment of rural proofings in Spain and in other countries to create equality between urban and rural areas.
As far as I know, they're working or they're focusing mostly in new legislation. So this will be a good advice to give them, just to acquire knowledge by doing what they're doing, but applying it to the ex post activity for the legislation in force.
Maybe a special case study in some field of priorities.
Yes, yeah. Yes.
Also
Yes,
to test the ex post impact assessment methodology in this field.
And just a follow-up question to that, are they trying to do it for all new legislation, or are they, or is it going to be more trial and error? Like, do we know?
Yes, there's a package of documents that they sent us explaining their, let's say, the laws and regulations that they have passed to implement rural proofing. And the idea is to have the widest scope possible. So let's say that they want to do it generally for all new legislation, no matter the I don't know if that's, I mean, that's,
Well, you already
sounds
knew
very
that's going to bring up
ambitious. Yeah.
it's going to bring up a question for me, because again, one of the things we talk about is, because countries, even the ones that are the most advanced with rural proofing, rarely get it right. There is always this idea of, do you rural proof everything, or do you try first to get it right, in bite size, smaller chunks, because you don't know if you're supporting instruments, you don't know if the evidence you're using, you don't know if the civil servants are going to use the document. There's so many unknowns that to widely launch something when you're still not sure if you have the window on the car where the door should be, it's dangerous. And it's also something where you have to say, the second question is, are you setting them up to fail? Right? So there is something to be thought about do we still use just a section to test? Because you need feedback loops. You need experts, civil, everyone in the room to kind of tweak. You need to massage it before you get it right and launch it. And so I think that's an important question, because if you go and say this, you can't, I would be very surprised, just because all the countries that have tried rural proofing to date are trying to get it right, that you would be able to introduce a document and it's going to work. And then it's going to be, because of the political eyes on it, it's going to be received negatively, and it's going to hurt the process in the long term. So it's just something to think about how to not do everything, but do work in this corner and try to get that right before doing something broad. And your evidence for that is in the countries you've already spoken to. The United Kingdom, Canada, who is probably outside of the EU, the country with the longest history of rural proofing, has started and dropped it at least 10 times in the last 20 years and just relaunched it again. And they think they're getting it right? And that's experience. So I really think that that's something that's very important as well.
That I'm getting very much understanding towards the Finnish model as well, because normally it's been understood that, well, the ideal model has to be general and mandatory. That is risky from that perspective, whereas the Finnish approach seemed to be more practical and more and fit for coping with any failure or problem that exactly could be encapsulated and treated, and then once the solutions are found and applied and tested, could go ahead and trying to promote the rural proofing method system or practice everywhere in many other fields that are relevant for rural impact. Well, I don't know if I should keep on reading some of the notes left here. Probably there, as I can see, yeah, taking a record of what we have been discussing today.
If I would add some just knows that the Finnish colleagues will be in Estonian workshop in the end of May, but I would like to emphasize that comparing Estonian and Finnish systems, and we are neighbors, the historical institutional issues are so different, so that it is quite hard to compare different countries. And some issues are working very well in Finland, and it is very consensus-based policy design and this Scandinavian type in general, but it is with many specifics. And so that comparing different countries, they have different institutional problems also, and maybe we in Estonia will have this kind of problems after 4 years, maybe, which Finland has now. And it is also we can borrow some good ideas, and Bedian made very good reports from OECD, but not all things, because the historical institutional structures are different, and this it is quite interesting how we are trying to unify also in the EU context these things, because different countries are using different concepts and they have different historical background. But now, if you the Castilla-La Mancha policymakers are trying to introduce this as a very good tool, then I think that it is the good project at the right time. In Estonian case, we lost our government 3 days ago now, and we will have some changes. I think that the support to the rural proofing will be smaller than it was, because Social Democrat Party was now out of the government, and the focus is more going to the military and security and economic things, not to the social innovation and so on. So that the times are different in different countries. But what is the basic and how to survive with this basic toolbox of rural proofing? It is also my background question, maybe.
I think you raise a really good point. And I think the point of our work was to show that all countries, no matter whether they're within the EU or outside the EU, all of them struggle with rural proofing. So I think the common theme is that even Finland is the only outlier that has consistently been better at rural proofing, but your Finnish colleagues will tell you that they are still struggling with rural proofing. They just look better because all the other countries failed. It was more visible. So I think your point is correct in that's why we did our paper trying to examine why it failed in each of the countries, because they were so different. And it failed for all the reasons that you said, and we listed it. They tried to do too much. The culture is different, all the things so that's why rural proofing we framed it as it's more challenging, because it has to be specifically designed to the country itself. And that takes time, because it's going to be learning by doing, and that's why I'm always on manage expectations. Don't go slowly, those types of things. It's why. So I'm really just agreeing with you that I think it's a good process, but it has to be approached very delicately.
All right. Well, I don't know if this time has reached your expectations. Mine are satisfactorily fulfilled. And I don't know if probably the last note to read is that from the representative of the government of Castilla-La Mancha concerning the independent evaluation. And they say something like, I wouldn't know how, Joao, you have your, thank you. How to answer this question, because the questions that society and the administration are going to ask themselves regarding the impact on the territory are going to be different from the very beginning. The same model will have to be established, and it would have to be seen if it can be answered by these two actors in the territory. So the frequency would have to be assessed as being at least more than a year, and far more than 2, maybe. So probably she's giving an answer in the line that society and administration have to work hand in hand also on this particular aspect. But anyway, at least they got the notion that it takes time, it needs time. So it sounds positive to me, at least. Well, so if you don't have anything else to say or to ask or to suggest, or
yeah, maybe your company is very inspiring. Just maybe some words about qualitative studies also, and the stories and narratives in this. In Estonia, I try to use so that the girl going to the first class is equal to, in the village, in the borderland, is equal with the girl is going in capital city to the first class, and this kind of narratives and stories, and how to use maybe the question for this also measurement is how to use these narratives in qualitative studies to make visible rural people, persons living in villages, in mountains, and so on. And in our media society, these narratives are more influential than the data many times. And it would be part of this rural impact assessment or rural proofing, and how to integrate them. For example, in the parliamentary fora, the stories are more important than the data sometimes. But of course, the data on inequality, access to the services, and so on, they have to be also on the table and collected before that, and to monitor them. But yeah, the integration of qualitative and quantitative tools. Just it was not so emphasized today, but I think it is important.
I think it's very important. I mean, I think it's part of the what we call the rural proof and intelligence. I think it's and that's where using the stakeholders and the diversity of stakeholders that should be part of this process to collect these stories and to have them ready. That's the point. The point of the rural proof and intelligence is to start, you can start working on that already, like so that it's ready, so that when the rural proofer needs it, he doesn't have to go looking. You have it available. So that's why the rural proof and intelligence is so important.
Yeah, I fully agree. I've been working a little bit on narratives, more focused on entrepreneurs in rural areas, and that's very interesting because entrepreneurs, even in the same region, or even in a rural area, different types of entrepreneurs perceive the support, perceive the policies in a different way. So yeah, that's.
And think about that, because the person who's going to be writing a strategy on entrepreneurs might not know anything about rural. So if he or she was handed a package of intelligence that showed, data on what rural brings, plus information about a woman entrepreneur, that already that's the educative process, right? And sometimes what we find in OECD countries is that even when you get their attention, there's no evidence. It's just think about rural, but there is no intelligence, no information for them to actually take away. And that is what makes rural, that also affects rural proofing. So, yeah.
Well, that sounds to me as emotional intelligence intended for administrative purposes, which looks more interesting than artificial intelligence. But anyway, well, we have already taken a lot of your precious time and a lot of your rural proofing intelligence as well. I hope that we will make good use of it, and we'll meet again because this goes on, and and it will be sooner than later. So I thank you again very much for your participation today, and I look forward to meeting again with you as soon as possible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.